Hello students, this is the video lecture for JMS 472, The History of the Book. I'm going to start off with this slide. What is a book? I found this definition from a dictionary online, and I'll just read it. It is a written or printed work consisting of pages glued or sewn together along one side and bound in covers. So think about that. Okay, we're going to come back to this point, but what is a book? Okay. And I want you to think about the book as a form of technology. We don't often think of it that way, but think about the book as a form of technology. Before books, we've talked about clay tablets already and hieroglyphs and things written in stone, but there was a portable way of documenting things on these scrolls written on. Here's an example of a scroll written on papyrus that was made from a plant very big in Egypt. Now here we have a codex, okay? This is parchment. Parchment is made from leather, comes from animal skins basically, and it could be sewn together and folded over, and basically it looks like a modern book, okay? Here we have the innovation of the codex, which is a different way of organization, okay? There were other ways of putting books together. Here we have an example of an accordion style book. These images, by the way, come from a presentation done by a graduate student many years ago. She was studying bookmaking and graphic design. So I think this is pretty interesting, an accordion style book. Now we're changing gears a little bit, and this is obviously an incredibly rushed overview of the history of books, but I just wanted to share a little bit of information. Calligraphy. This is an example of some Chinese characters. Now, in Chinese writing, there are something like 50,000 possible different characters. An educated person may only know a few thousand, and there may only be a few thousand that are commonly used, but the number of characters is really, really vast. And printing, as we now use the term, was invented in China. They would carve things into either wood or stone, put ink on it, and then you could print. This was a fairly laborious way. You could make multiple copies of something, but once something was carved, it couldn't be changed. Now, the Chinese did create movable type, okay? Here we have different characters on different blocks, and by putting the blocks together in different combinations, now you could make different things, okay? Whereas previously, one block or one piece of wood is going to produce one image. Now you could actually change things around. And this comes from a museum somewhere. An example of the way Chinese printers would work. You could see these giant tables with, I mean, there must be thousands of different characters there, but this essentially is the beginning of printing. And then the technology slowly moves from Asia over to Europe, okay? Now, during the Middle Ages, illuminated manuscripts were very popular, created by monks. They're very elaborately decorated religious texts. And you have to imagine that it might take, oh, actually, now that I look at it, this is an image of an illuminated manuscript that is working as a phone cover. I love that. That's an accidental mistake when I found that image, but God, I love that accidental mistake there. An illuminated manuscript working as a cell phone cover. But anyway, this is what illuminated manuscripts look like, and you have to imagine that it would take monks weeks, months, possibly even years to make an entire book. And the parchment to make a book, you may have to use something like 40 or 50 sheep just to get enough parchment for one book. So books were pretty rare. Okay, books were pretty rare, and they weren't in widespread circulation. Now, between 1440, 1450, somewhere in there, German inventor Gutenberg invents the printing press. Here is a visual depiction of the printing press. And the real innovation that made this possible, and this overlaps with the readings that I've assigned for this week, the real innovation here is this movable type and the standardization of the characters, okay? In the alphabet, the way we use the Western alphabet, there's a much more limited number of characters than what the Chinese were using. So people had to figure out how to make these totally consistent. You could mass produce them, okay? So this is part of the invention of printing, is the mass production of these letters. You could put them together. Here's an image that shows you. You could reuse the letters over and over again to print different books, okay? the first thing that Gutenberg prints, or at least the first one that's in widespread circulation. Okay, we actually don't have any copies of anything that Gutenberg printed before the Bible. Was the Bible that he started printing, and it got into fairly widespread circulation. I mean, we're talking hundreds of copies, not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds of copies of the Bible. This is the Gutenberg Bible, and look at all the images, look at all the space here, What could be done is that monks, rather than lose their job entirely, okay, monks could add in thing and do artwork here. And there are examples. I love that hybrid technology where the monks are continuing their hand drawing and their illustration, but doing it around text that is printed. And I'm guessing that these colors right here, it's kind of a blurry image, these may have been done by hand as well, whereas the text is printed in black. Okay, before we proceed, I'm going to play a short video. I'm just going to insert it here directly into this video lecture. I believe the original language is Dutch. It's definitely not in English. I'm hoping that the subtitles come across. But the point of this video, which I think is really quite brilliant, is to really show that the book is a form of technology. And even though, you know, maybe some of us, or maybe your parents or grandparents may stumble over how to use the new iPhone or how to use a new tablet, the joke here is that a man doesn't know how to use a book. Okay, it's kind of funny, but hopefully the subtitles will come across.
Broder Ansgar?
Ja.
Det er deg, ja.
Ja.
Så bra, ok.
Ja, hei du.
Da fatter jeg det.
Hei du. Ja.
Ja, hva gjelder det?
Ja, det er denne her. Ja, vil du sitte?
Takk.
Ja.
Jaha?
Ja, så jeg har ikke fått gjort noen ting hele formiddag,
Ok, nei, jeg beklager at det tar tid. Altså, skjønner vi holder på å legge om til et helt nytt system, og da skal alle ha hjelp på en gang, vet du.
Ja.
Så du kommer ikke inn i den, eller?
Nei, den bare ligger der.
Ok, har du forsøkt å åpne den?
Ja, åpne den, altså hvis det hadde vært så enkelt, så hadde jeg jo ikke tilkalt helpdesk, hadde jeg vel?
Nei, det er
Nei.
sant.
Nei. Vil du ha en kopp varmt vann?
Nei da, det skal være fort gjort. Det
Ja.
skal vi se. Du bare gjør der. Sånn.
Ja.
Da er du i gang.
Ja, altså så langt kom jeg også.
Ok.
Ikke sant? Men så stoppet det opp, og så var jeg redd for at noe av teksten skulle forsvinne, så jeg turte ikke å gå videre.
Åja, ok. Nei, men du skjønner at inni her så ligger det kanskje flere hundre sider med lagret tekst. Så for å komme videre så tar du tak i et ark på den måten her, og så liksom blar du over på neste side sånn. Da fortsetter teksten der.
Jeg blar, altså.
Du blar, ja.
Men når jeg skal tilbake da?
Ja, da bare blar du tilbake igjen. Tar tak der, og så gjør du sånn. Der, så er du tilbake til den teksten du hadde i stad. Ikke noe
Ok, så den
forandret.
slutter der,
Ja.
og så fortsetter den der, ja. Ok, men når jeg skal avslutte for dagen, hva gjør jeg da?
Da bare slår du sammen permene
Ja?
på den måten der. Sånn. Da er den lukket, da ligger alt lagret inni der.
Altså, jeg risikerer ikke å miste noe av teksten her nå,
Nei,
altså.
alt ligger lagret inni her nå.
Ja.
Da må du i tilfelle sette fyr på hele greia. Det er kanskje lite sannsynlig. Så.
Ja, ok. Nei, men for det er noe med det at ikke sant, når du har holdt på med skriftruller,
Ja.
så tar det litt grann tid å konvertere til å bla i en bøk. Ja. Ja, gå til, vet du.
Det er greit.
Ja, flott. Ja, men du, en til før du går. Jeg må bare gå gjennom en gang til. Altså, jeg åpner
Ja,
sånn,
ja, riktig.
og så, hva har du kalt det?
Blar.
Jeg blar,
Ja, bla videre.
blar frem og tilbake.
Ja,
Og når,
teksten ligger der hele tiden.
ja. Og når jeg er ferdig, så bare lukker jeg den.
Ja, riktig.
Flott.
Fint det.
Kjempefint.
Ja, flott det.
Ja, men du, vent, ikke sant? Nå er den sånn igjen, nå får jeg ikke åpnet den. Nå får jeg ikke åpnet den.
Ja, det er fra feil side. Du må åpne fra andre siden.
Så det er ikke likegyldig, det,
Nei,
altså?
du må åpne fra den siden der. Sånn. Der. Der er den åpen.
Ja vel.
Har du
Ok.
lest manualen, eller?
Manualen?
Det skal følge med som manualen som brukerveiledning. Det er sikkert den der. Der, vet du.
Å ja,
I
den,
der
ja.
står alt sammen.
Ja, men ikke sant, der har du samme problemet. Får den ikke opp. Får åpnet den, så.
Ok, det skulle vi kanskje ha tenkt på.
All right, hopefully you got something out of that. And again, hopefully you could read the subtitles. But the next video that I'm going to show you, examines the idea of the page as interface. Interface refers to the way you interact with the communications technology, okay? You know, when Facebook changes its interface or Snapchat changes its interface, everyone notices, But think about the page, okay? If the written word is communications technology, the way the page is laid out actually evolved over time. And the video, I'm going to show it and try and read some of the explanation captions to you, shows the way pages evolved over 1,000 years, okay? Here we have a single column, there's no spacing, okay? Now we have 2 columns and we get some spacing, okay, between the lines of text. What happens next here? Now there's spacing between words, okay. This is from 731, that's pretty old. Now we have some punctuation marks appearing. We're up to 1099, okay. 11th century, now we've got 2 columns, some spacing between words, some punctuation marks. We've got a different kind of font. Now we've got some capitalization coming in and capital letters being a different color, okay? Now we've got marks between verses, okay? This is this is a religious text, okay? Now we have more evolution. Now again, it's starting to look to me a little bit more modern. This is starting to look the way we would expect a page to look today. Okay, and now we're getting a title, okay? This is 1525, 1535, thereabouts, okay? Now we're getting a little bit more evolution. We've got semicolons coming in. Now we're up to 1470, okay? This one's actually in English, and you could read this one if you chose to do so. Now we've got numbered verses, okay? Gospel of St. John, now we've got numbered verses. Many of you may be familiar with some of these verses. We're up to 1560. Now we've got comments coming in the margin, okay? We've got annotation coming in. Now this is actually on paper, okay? Paper wasn't widely used really until the late 1800s, but transferring trees into wood pulp to make paper was a later innovation that made the mass production of books even more possible. And now we have something revealed online. Okay, I hope you got something out of that. I find that video to be fascinating, and we're going to reference that in an assignment coming up in a couple of weeks. All right, now remember that definition of book that I gave you just a couple of minutes ago? It wasn't that long ago, okay? I gave you a definition of a book. It talked about something had to have a cover. Electronic readers, right? Many of you may use these. I don't like reading stuff electronically. I'm just old. I like reading things in a book, okay? They don't have covers, right? Does it still count as a book? I mean, you have to wonder, does it still count as a book? And I have to say, I miss book covers because on public transportation, on an airplane, you could see what someone was reading and maybe start a conversation. Oh, by the way, I read that. I'm not going to provide a spoiler, but I read that. That's good. You know, anyway, I just find it kind of cool that you could see the cover. Now you can't do that. And then several years ago, there was also the creation of cell phone novels, okay? Things written a narrative format specifically to be read on a phone. And I'm pretty sure these got started in Japan. Here's an article from CNN about one of these that came out in Japan. People are on crowded public transportation in Japan. They're reading these short things written in text messages, but it counts as a novel. Does it count as a book? Would you call it a book? We still, even with the move to electronic formats, we still associate books with education and people being educated, and there's sort of this, I don't know, sort of a nostalgia to them. You can see this virtual background behind me. That is the old JMS conference room in the PSFA building. Maybe some of you remember the old PSFA building, but this is the old conference room. I just happen to have saved an image. I'm using it as my virtual background because I'm a professor and hopefully it makes me look educated. But the idea that we still associate books with people being educated and being smart is illustrated by a clip from the original RoboCop, which I will play now.
Hey, man, what you reading in there? You a college boy or something? Huh? I bet you think you're pretty smart, huh? Think you could outsmart a bullet?
All right, I'm going to go over a couple of points. These points that I'm going over are from the reading notes that I've already posted on Canvas. I'm recording this on Friday, September 11th, but I've already posted these notes on Canvas. Okay, the invention of printing this piece of writing by Mumford, which I think is brilliant. I think this is absolutely brilliant. And this was written decades ago, okay? I think the book that this come from, Techniques and Civilization, was originally published in the 1930s, okay? So the fact that something written in the 1930s still seems remarkably relevant today, I think is a sign of good intellectual work, okay? The first sentence of the reading, okay? I'm just going to read it verbatim to you, all right? The invention of printing from movable type is second only to clock in its critical effect upon our civilization. We're not going to talk about the standardization of time. That's another lecture, okay? Blah, blah, blah. And it's in its own right, talking about printing, in its own right, exemplifies the much broader passage constantly going on in our own day, from the tool to the handwork machine, and from the machine to the completely automatic self-regulating device from which, at the end, I love this, almost every intervention of the human person is eliminated, except at the very beginning in the arrangement of the work and at the very end in the consumption, okay? This reminds me of our recent discussion about algorithms, that humans set them up and humans consume the media products, but once they're set up, the algorithms kind of function on their own, okay? Mumford takes this idea and explores it in relation to printing, okay? He also talks about the importance of font, and that the human element and the element of artistic craftsmanship, which we saw with the monks, is not eliminated entirely from printing because you have this concept of font and different typography. I've posted on Canvas a short video about the history of typography, which talks about fonts, which I think is absolutely brilliant. You know, several years ago, I saw a documentary about Helvetica. When my wife suggested, she said, there's a documentary about Helvetica, and I was like, you mean like the font? Someone made a documentary about a font? It's actually quite genius, quite brilliant, and talks about the standardization of human civilization, okay? Here's a graphic I borrowed from another professor, Jessica Pressman. Font conveys a type of meaning, okay? If you saw something written in Comic Sans, you maybe don't take it seriously, but if you saw something written in number 4, maybe that seems more truthful because it looks like handwriting, and handwritten things should be more truthful. I love this quote. Mumford is talking about the relationship between literacy and loss of firsthand experience and contacts, which leads to a loss of both sense and sensibility with an increase of pride and prejudice. So again, this relates to some quotes from earlier lectures about writing deprives you of actual firsthand experience, and it leads to the illusion of knowledge, not actual knowledge. I don't know if I accept this 100%, but I find it very provocative, okay? That maybe there's a loss of both common sense and sensibility because we're consuming everything through printing. Chapter 12, you know, when I taught this class before with a previous version of the textbook, chapter 12 wasn't in here. So this is new. So this was new for me. I read it for the first time recently. And it's about sensationalism in the news. And, you know, we might think sensationalism and the way news media likes to cover lurid, graphic stories, whether they be murder or sex crimes or something like that, is, you know, goes back at least hundreds of years, okay? And the author talks about these. I just love this reading. I found it, you know, fascinating. You can skim it if you want to, but just get the gist of it. Here we have this publication from 1624 talking about the decapitation and mutilation. And just to drive the point home, I did a close-up of the image right here, okay? And then, of course, there were the news stories about Jack the Ripper from the 1880s in England, okay? You know, a serial killer who was sort of celebrated and really somewhat glorified by the press. And some other images talking about sensationalism is, when I was growing up, I was a kid in the 70s, there was these crime magazines, detective magazines, true crime magazines, and I would always see them in the grocery store or newsstand, and I would always wonder, sometimes I'd look at them, you know, they were sort of in the back next to the adult magazines. I'd look at them and I'd wonder, who in their right mind is buying these disgusting magazines? But, you know, they're collectible. I just found this image earlier this morning. People are buying these things on eBay. And then something else from my younger days, Weekly World News. This was the most over-the-top, bizarre of the tabloids. I don't think it exists anymore. There was actually fine print inside Weekly World News that flat out said nothing in here is true. It's all published for entertainment purposes. This is one of their famous images about Bat Boy. I think there was even an off-Broadway musical based on Bat Boy. That's it. The end.